All right, this test requires a little bit more work because before sending this request, we should make sure to have that movie in the database. So when we execute the request, then we can inspect that the number of movies in stock is increased by 1. So first, let's go back to our before each function. So here, just like how we create a rental, we should also create a movie. So I'm going to define a variable here, movie, and then in the before each function, we initialize movie to a new movie object with these properties. We set the ID to the same ID that we generated earlier. So movie ID, title, again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Daily rental rate, we set this to 2, the same value we used here. Now we could refactor these, put them in a separate constant. It doesn't really matter as much in this case because we're not going to come back and modify 2 to 3 sometime in the future, and then we'll have to modify 2 different places. So these are constant values we're going to use for all the tests in this suite. So daily rental rate, we should also set the genre because that's a required property. We set the name here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And finally, number in stock to 10. We have a movie object now. We save it and await the promise. Now let's create our test. So I'm going to duplicate this last test and change the title accordingly. So it should increase the movie stock. So we don't need these first 2 lines. We simply send the request. Then instead of getting a rental object, we need to get a movie object. So we need to import the movie class on the top. So I'm going to duplicate this line and change rental to movie like this. Now back in our test. So we get, let's rename this to movie in DB. We use the movie class to look up a document with this ID, movie ID. Then we expect number in stock for this movie to be 11. Now there is another way to write this test. Someone looking at this code, they may say, where did that 11 come from? This looks like a magic number. That's a fair argument. So the other way to write this is like this. So earlier we created this movie object. We can get the number in stock property and add 1 to it. All right, so let's test this. Save, back in the terminal. We have a failing test. So let's go ahead and make this pass. Back in our route handler, first we need to import the movie class. So on the top, I'm gonna duplicate this line and import the movie class from the movie module. Now to make the test pass, we can use the query first or update first approach. Let's use the update first approach because we don't really need to read the movie in this case. So movie.update, as the first argument, we pass our query object. So we're looking for a movie with ID equal to rental.movie._ID. Now, as a second argument, we pass our update object. Here we use the increment operator. We need to increment the value of number in stock property by 1. So actually, I would rather to save the rental first because all these lines are about changing the state of the rental. Once we're done with this story, then we'll look at the next story, which is updating the movie. Now, save, back in the terminal. Our test failed, so let's see what's happening here. We expected value to be 11, but we got 10. Again, this is the beauty of writing tests. My code has a bug. So, can you tell what I was missing here? Well, as you know, this returns a promise. So here we need to await this. So we update the database first before returning the response. In the previous implementation, our test check the value of number in stock before this update happened. Now let's save this. Back in the terminal, all tests are passing. Now, one thing we forgot was to do cleanup after we create that movie. So here in after each function, we should also remove all the movie documents in our movies collection. So we're done with this test. Now let's look at your next exercise. I want you to implement the last test case, returning the rental in the body of the response.